Welcome to the Circular Economy Show. I'm Jess.
And I'm Ella. And in this episode, we'll be looking at the Big Food Redesign Challenge launched last week by the Foundation.
And we're also going to be previewing the upcoming negotiations for the Global Plastics Treaty happening in Paris this week.
So stay where you are and enjoy the show.
On this episode of the Circular Economy Show, we'll be finding out how radical seasonality and thoughtful food design can spark very different outcomes for the food system with Natoora.
We'll be asking our food initiative lead, Rhaenyra, the biggest questions about the Big Food Redesign Challenge and on the topic of circular economy food design.
Colin returns to debunk what we mean by the circular economy principle, regenerate nature.
And we'll be speaking to the Foundation's Carsten and Eric from WWF about what to expect from this week's Global Plastics Treaty negotiations and why this effort is so important.
Welcome to the May edition of the Circular Economy Show. I'm really pleased today because I'm joined by my colleague Ella, who is making her first appearance on the show in 2023.
So let's get straight into it. We will be learning more about the Big Food Redesign Challenge launched by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation last week very shortly. But first, what do we mean by designing our food? We're going to start by looking at a real-world example.
So let's find out more about Natoora, who supply food to world-leading supermarkets as well as kitchens, and they also have a small number of their very own stores. So they're based in North America, in Europe, and they're also based in Australasia. In this short film, we're going to find out how Natoora designed food products that regenerate nature rather than destroying it. And we're also going to find out why radical seasonality has a huge role to play.
First and foremost, we source for flavour. There's been a considerable degradation in the value that people place against food, and we believe that by sourcing through flavour, we have a trickle-down effect on how food is grown, and we can fulfil our overarching mission that is essentially to revolutionise the food system. Flavour, when it's at its peak, is a sign of a vegetable or a fruit or a product that has essentially been grown in a responsible fashion. It's been grown seasonally, in the correct climate, under the correct conditions, and by masters of their arts, farmers and growers who care about stewarding the soil and growing in the correct practices, growing for flavour, not yield and not profit. Originally, DNA, fruit and vegetables, but we quickly realised that our mission doesn't just extend to fresh fruit and vegetables and things like grains or manufactured products or sauces or juices or dips or soups. Also, all food feed into this food system, and it's important to kind of bring those into the conversation as well. So we work with over 400 growers and farmers and growing in a collaborative fashion to kind of bring these products in. Since the 1950s and when supermarkets really became a thing, there's been a huge growth in industrial mass agriculture, where the focus is on consistency of size, monocultures grown all year round, no crop rotation, little or no care taken for the soil. And what we've ended up with is, perhaps a cheaper, less flavourful product, but also a product that's less nutritionally dense. So in removing the care and the love that's gone into growing it and taking too much out of the soil without putting anything back in, we've lost a lot of that nutritional density. We look at developing products that both fulfill that need and fill that gap, if you like, but also stay true to our brand values of seasonality, flavour and traceability. And the range is designed in a way that we try and toe the line between familiarity with an average consumer, but also discovery and kind of pushing the envelope a little bit in terms of trying something new. So as an example, if you look at top selling dips in the UK, everyone's favorite hummus is at the top, but not far behind that is tzatziki. So we've kind of given our twist and brought in an enigmatic kind of British twist to it by using kind of peppery watercress in there to bring something that is familiar by name, but perhaps gives a beautiful product that grows very well in the UK, opens a lot of consumers' eyes to that. We recognise quite early on that we have to work within the food system in order to change it to a certain degree, and big retailers and the food system in general likes to have a consistent product on the shelf throughout the year. It plays into consumer habits, consumer behaviours. Another fantastic example would be our tomato soup. It's a staple, best-selling soup in the UK, not ours, but as a category, yet, should I say. So in the summer months, we buy fantastic Datorini tomatoes from a grower called Tuccio, who we've worked with for a number of years. We even have a meeting room in our office named after him. And those are fantastic. They taste great. We roast them up and we make a soup with Umbrian and Coco Bianco beans with that. When the weather gets colder, there are actually varieties and cultivars of tomatoes that thrive as the weather cools. And we launch, I guess you could call it, we now sell a range of tomatoes in the winter under the umbrella winter tomatoes. So we shift our supply chain, we flex our supply chain, and we use a black Iberico tomato from Almeria in Spain. So the consumer is still getting a tomato soup throughout the year, but we're celebrating the biodiversity that's out there. We're supporting multiple growers so that their art and their craft does not die out. And all in all, it's a win-win for everybody. The term winter tomato, for instance, is now being used by Nigel Slater. It's being used by the River Cafe. It's widely used now within food literature and journalism. And this is not something that existed before we started bringing over these amazing winter tomatoes. On the consistency of supply side, I think it comes back to the relationships that we've built and also our forecasting and giving the growers and farmers the confidence that if they grow this crop for us and out on a limb, we're going to take it. And if they have flooding or if they have abnormally high temperatures and they only get half the crop that they thought they were going to get, we will pay them a higher price for it so that they can still survive and their art and their trade and their family and their business can thrive and continue to thrive. It's in part the way that we design products is what we've learnt from working with these retailers. So if we were making products for purely our stores, it may be that we weren't pushed to innovate in the way that we have and find solutions to work within this system. Our price point is on the premium end. And yes, the location that we're filming in is one of the more wealthy areas of London. I do believe that scaling and showing that what we do is possible in the hope that other businesses adopt it is the only way that prices are going to come down.
So we've just heard from Natoora, who's just one example of the many businesses out there who are redesigning our food system. But let's dig into this even deeper. The Foundation's food lead, Reneira, is joining us in the studio today.
Thank you for joining us, Reneira. So last week, the Foundation launched its big food redesign challenge. Can you tell us what that is?
I can, absolutely. I'll start off by saying that it is the most exciting thing that we are doing and have done in a while, and we're super excited about it. What it is a global food redesign challenge called the Big Food Redesign Challenge, and it aims to inspire and engage the food sector in redesigning or designing food products that put nature at the heart of those design decisions. In 2021, we released the Big Food Redesign report, and in there created a framework which will help companies do this, looking at how you can make better design decisions in terms of the ingredients that you put into our food products that really do help build soil health, build back biodiversity, and really help nature thrive. The challenge, like you said, it opened last week. It's going to run for 18 months. For the first 6 months of that, companies will be supported through a learning journey, which we're really excited about. Get some collaborative brain juice flowing and get them working together to create a prototype. And we've also been working with How Good and the Sustainable Food Trust in looking at developing a suite of metrics against which we're going to measure these products. And so we are really, really excited about the direction of travel for this programme and also what it could mean for the food sector.
Thanks, Natoora. And as obviously the title suggests, our food is designed, but is our food really designed?
I think it is. And I mean, I've said this before, I think it's a strange concept to think of our food as being designed, and it isn't a natural space for us. We look at our clothes and our houses, our shoes and our cars, and we understand the word design. But if you think about the food that you pull off the shelf in the supermarket, your box of cereal, your ready meal lasagna, your chocolate bar, whatever it is that you're taking off the shelf, somebody somewhere has made a decision about how big it is, what it looks like, what it's going to taste like, what ingredients are going to go into it, where those ingredients are going to come from, how those ingredients are grown, how the food is packaged, and how it gets to us as a consumer. And if you think of those decisions, if we changed any of those decisions, the design of the product would change. So absolutely, food is designed. I mean, we don't think of it like that, but absolutely it is. And even down to the choice in what variety of seed is grown to grow the carrots or the potatoes or the vegetables that go into it, or even what breed of livestock is being raised to go into the food that we eat. These are all design decisions, which if you made a different decision, would give us a different outcome.
So you mentioned prototypes, and I think we all understand the role of piloting in helping a circular economy to happen. But can we really imagine a future in which we walk into those supermarkets and at scale we can see those products on the shelf and we can purchase them for ourselves? And I guess what's the role of the retailer in that process?
So I think, obviously we are very optimistic and hopeful and can see a future where absolutely you can walk into a supermarket and everything that you pull off the shelf, you can be guaranteed that nature hasn't been degraded by how the food product the food ingredients were grown. I think retailers have a huge role to play in this. They are the window, the showcase of the food that we buy, and they sell it to us. And for all, as consumers, we make decisions. A lot of those decisions are based on, where the food is placed in the supermarket or how it's advertised to us and how it's marketed. So I think there is a huge role for retail to play in the challenge, which is fantastic. And we've got retailers who are engaged and who are going to be working to be able to support the successful products through shelf placement. But they can't do it alone. Large companies and the small innovators also have a huge role to play because they are the ones that bring those products to market, and they are the ones who are the step between us and, growing our own vegetables and getting things straight off the land. So I think they have a huge role to play in really driving the demand for a new kind of food system out there, but also helping consumers understand how to engage with a food system that can really regenerate our natural ecosystems.
And there's one thing that I think people who are watching this might be wondering, is this just going to cost us more?
I think, sadly, at the start of this journey, the reality is it probably will cost us more. But I think for a long time, we have not been paying the true cost of food. So we are all really used to having cheap food that's readily accessible at all times of the year, even if it's not coming from the right place. And there are some really scary statistics. So for every £1 that we pay for food, there's an associated £2 of health costs. Now, if you can imagine a future where our food system is not contributing to those health costs, think about how we could redirect the £2 for every £1 that we spend on food. So governments and legislators and policymakers have a real role to play in thinking about how to help bridge the gap so that we can actually make food that is regeneratively sourced, regeneratively grown, that is diverse, lower impact and much better for our ecosystems, accessible to everybody. And I think, we are completely of the view that a food system that builds our natural ecosystems should absolutely 100% be accessible to everybody, and it should be the norm. But we do accept there is going to be a transition period. And I guess the other thing to say is, it's always easy to think of this as there's a silver bullet, right? Let's get regeneratively sourced produce, let's have lower impact ingredients, diverse and upcycled ingredients, as we talk about in the report. But a system is not just those things. And I think for every part of the system to succeed, everything has to change. So if we want to get to a place where we are scaling this kind of food system, we need much more parts of the system to move. I kind of think about it like renewable energy. 20 years ago, renewable energy was incredibly expensive. But as we've started to scale that, we have started to see those costs come down. And so if we can get to a place where we are scaling a food system that does build healthy ecosystems, hopefully we will start to see the cost of that food system come down and it be accessible to everybody.
Thank you so much, Natoora, for joining us on the Circular Economy show. So our food is designed, and the redesign of this food according to a new set of principles can create a thriving food system for producers, for farmers and for businesses. And it can also regenerate nature and provide more opportunities and give more offers to people.
So we've heard from Natoora and we've heard from Rowan from Natoora about how redesigning a food system can regenerate nature, which is, of course, the third principle of a circular economy. But what does that really mean? And does it only apply to food? We've got our very own Colin Webster to explain it all.
The circular economy presents an opportunity to transform our current linear system into one that's good for business, people, and the environment. But how can we explain all of what the circular economy has to offer? Well, we designed 3 core principles, all driven by design. And in this video, we'll summarise the third one: regenerate nature. The third principle of the circular economy is firmly embedded in the natural world. And the neat thing is, it's simple to understand. Let's start with the basics. When trees drop their leaves, no one complains that they make a mess or litter the forest. And we all know the reason why. The leaves eventually break down and add value to the forest as a whole. And without this natural detritus, the forest wouldn't prosper. They play their part in the forest's natural cycle of regeneration. So how do we apply this principle to the way that we do things? Well, we don't just want to maintain the biosphere as it is or minimise the problems we're creating. We want to regenerate it and leave the world in a better place than we found it. Let's find out how we do that. Orongo Station in New Zealand managed to turn around their underperforming land to become regenerative in a period of 20 years. This 3,000-acre coastal farm had been overgrazed and deforested, and with that came soil erosion and an uncertain future. The owners researched the land to come up with solutions, and this led to the establishment of wetland areas to enhance habitats, designing steeper slopes so that birds could nest in peace from invasive predators, the replanting of 600,000 suitable trees, and, well, much more besides. The result is a thriving landscape, a much more productive farm, and the farm was also made sure to give greater access to local Maori. And we can apply circular principles to the ocean as well. Greenwave is a network of regenerative ocean farmers. They farm by using a lattice of ropes and baskets to harvest shellfish and seaweed in a nature-positive way. The ingredients they harvest are used for food, fertiliser, animal feed and bioplastics, and their practices restore marine ecosystems. It's regenerative. So applying regenerative food growing practices helps build up soil health, which in turn helps it absorb more carbon from the atmosphere and soak up more water. So whether it's on the land or the ocean, we produce healthier food, healthier environments, and we do it in a way that helps tackle climate change and encourages greater biodiversity. Oh, and by the way, all of this is done whilst eliminating synthetic chemical inputs like pesticides and fertilisers, and by increasing the diversity of crops. The third principle can also be applied in our cities. We can create a regenerative built environment where buildings clean water and produce more energy than they consume. Green facades provide habitats for wildlife, and can also help keep the building cool in the summer and warm in the winter. Take this City Hall in Venlo. The north facade comprises over 100 plant varieties to improve the air quality outside the building. This not only converts carbon dioxide to oxygen, but it also filters particulates, and it provides noise insulation and creates a habitat for birds and insects. An interior green wall adds moisture to the air inside the building, and rainwater is collected on the roof, then filtered through a reed bank in order to help flush the toilets. Venlo City Hall is the perfect example of a building designed to give more than it takes, much like a forest.
It's been a bumper couple of weeks in the world of circular economy. As you just heard, last week we launched the Big Food Redesign Challenge, and later this week negotiations will resume in Paris regarding the global treaty on plastics pollution.
And just as with food, we need better design and better innovation in the plastic sector. Policy is a critical enabler for this transformation to happen. We need to put in place regulations and incentives.
The Circular Economy Show's Seb spoke together with the Foundation's Carsten and WWF's Eric. In this conversation, we'll be understanding what the two organisations are hoping to achieve through their collaboration and getting a bit of insight as to what those negotiations might look like.
Welcome to the show, Eric and Carsten. So, regular viewers of the show have heard a lot about the Global Plastics Treaty. But Eric, I wonder if you could tell us, what exactly are the Foundation and WWF working on together?
So we're working together to make the most out of this once-in-a-generation opportunity to create a global regulatory framework for plastic pollution. We are, of course, coming from slightly different perspectives, developing our policy asks for specific regulations to be included in the treaty. And I think we both realized a few years back, this has been a long process, as all international treaty processes. We realized that many of the ambitious companies didn't really have a platform and a channel into, and weren't really represented in the discussions at the global level, and that there was actually a lot of potential ambition and interest out there that was fragmented and didn't really make it through. And then, of course, there's the important experience, I think, from both organizations, that a lot of the voluntary actions taken by businesses hasn't been enough to date, and there's a need for something more. So therefore, we came together and started convening the progressive business voices to come up with strong recommendations for the treaty process.
So it's been a bit of a journey, and it's fundamentally about, in many ways, this collaboration about bringing the private sector voice into this ongoing negotiation. I guess the next question, Eric, is why is it so crucial this treaty is legally binding? And maybe the question underneath that question is, why are businesses supporting regulation against themselves?
Yeah, I think it's really fundamental that it is binding. Otherwise, you lose really that harmonization aspect. You lose the potential opportunity that is there in common rules. And I think that businesses are actually, well, not all, but quite a few businesses, and those that we are working with, are actually then advocating for regulation on themselves, because they see, first, there's a realization that the efforts that they are able to do voluntary within their own organization are not enough. And if they do what actually is needed, I guess there is a fear of actually being outcompeted as well. And then the second is the cost of operation. If you have a very clear set of global rules specific on the different products you use, the types of plastic you use, etc., then you know your operating space. and you can work within that also at the global level. If you have 196 different laws to deal with, it becomes very complex. It becomes there's a lot of then costs related to operating in that framework.
So this is really about making the economics of a circular economy for plastics work. I understand, and Carsten, correct me if I'm wrong, but I understand that because these are quite complicated international processes, but I understand that one element of this is the coalition will submit recommendations into the negotiation processes, including the ones upcoming in Paris. What are those business coalition recommendations for this phase of the negotiations?
Obviously, we start from a vision, a common vision, which is a circular economy in which plastic never becomes waste or pollution, and the value of products and materials, not just plastics, but those who are containing plastics or replacing plastics, are retained in the economy. And then we think the treaty needs to support progress in 3 critical areas. And these are the starting points that we're trying to enhance a common understanding of the industry, of the governments, but also other civil society stakeholders. And the first one is around reduction of plastic production and use through a circular economy approach. That means we would like to focus and get rid of some of the plastics that have really high leakage rates, that are ending up very likely in the environment, which are short-lived, means they become waste very quickly. And in many countries, we cannot handle them properly at the end of life yet. Or that are made from using fossil-based virgin resources, where we see this is not a sustainable model going forward. Once we have looked at the plastic items that can be eliminated, we are pretty confident we will continue using plastics as a material for many applications that we want to maintain. But we need to make sure that we keep those plastics in the economy and out of the environment. That's where the heart of the circular economy discussion and recycling takes place. And then we have to acknowledge, at least over the coming decades, there are a lot of sources of plastic pollution, either the bigger parts, macroplastics we call them, or the really tiny bits that we can't even see, microplastics, that are really hard to abate. So we need to think about either preventing them from the outset, or we need to remediate the pollution that they caused already in the environment. So reduction, circulation, and prevention alongside remediations are the 3 pillars where we are building our policy recommendation on.
I wondered, Eric, whether you could talk about what the priorities ought to be. Like, obviously, this is a very broad space. There's a lot of different kinds of plastics and different kinds of usage and use cases. What are the priorities for the partnership between the Foundation, WWF, and the Business Coalition in terms of these negotiations, and also this specific point in negotiations?
I think at this stage, a main priority, a kind of a cross-cutting priority, is to make sure that we get a treaty that is binding, that has the common global rules, that has the different categories of regulation, that we have a treaty that is able to eliminate the most high-risk plastic pollution products, that leads to an overall reduction, that creates the necessary regulations for circularity, and that has the right regulations at the global level also for collection and remediation. To be honest, we know already a lot. We hear a lot of this, the plastic pollution problem and economy is so big and so complex. But I think both from an environmental perspective, where we in WWF are coming from, and from a business perspective, and from human health perspectives and scientific perspectives as well, there is already a lot of information. We have already the information that we need in order to start with the most problematic types of plastics.
I like how you describe that in terms of it not being purely a silver bullet. It's about setting a new direction for regulation in the sector. And I guess, Carsten, it's worth saying that plastics waste and pollution doesn't sit in isolation, right, amongst other global issues.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're probably all familiar with the ongoing efforts to combat climate change and to stay within a 1.5 degree global warming scenario so that we don't go beyond that in this century. And obviously plastics are made from fossil fuels, and they are, to a significant amount, are contributing to the problems on climate change, but also when they end up in places where they shouldn't end up in the natural environment, they are harming biodiversity. So we need to make these links. But for the plastics treaty to be effective, it's important that we don't stay just with loose aspirations. We need to underpin these with effective measures.
We've heard how this is about fostering a new form of collaboration between the public and the private sector, or incentivizing and supporting that, and the importance of this kind of being a legally binding set of measures, specific measures with teeth that set a new direction. Eric and Carsten, thank you so much for making the time to chat. We'll let you get back to all the hard work you're doing, and I'm sure we'll speak to you again on the Circular Economy Show.
And that was it for the May edition of the Circular Economy Show. We found out a little bit more about the Big Food Redesign Challenge. Definitely check out the website to look more things up.
And we saw food redesign in action with Natoora. If that story inspired you, do head on over to listen to our podcast series.
And we also previewed the negotiations of the Global Plastics Treaty. Definitely tune in next month as we'll be following up on that.
So that's it for this edition of the Circular Economy Show. Remember that you can ask your questions directly to the team using the hashtag AskTheCEShow on LinkedIn and on Twitter. Next month, we will be focusing more on plastics.
And be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, and do not forget to click that bell so you get notified every time we post content from the show. See you next time.